Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and with me is my colleague, our Communications Director, Matt Fleming. Matt, how are you today?
Good, Tim. Glad to be here.
And I'm sure, like me, you are thrilled that the election is over, the election what was, and now we have, well, an interesting mess on our hands, I think, in the California political world. So, California voters, following the late polls, overwhelmingly approved Gavin Newsom's effort to gerrymander California, to do away with the independent commission's work for this decade for the California congressional district lines. And, in thinking about this, it's a very interesting vote because, at the same time, I think if you ask most Californians, they would strongly support the independent redistricting commission. When we started thinking about this, when this effort came into play, my thinking was, well, if the voters are voting on, do we support independent redistricting? Well, they'll turn down Prop 50. But if they're voting on, we want to get at Trump, it's going to pass overwhelmingly. And I think you even predicted that it would mirror kind of the partisan breakdown of the state. And it was pretty close, I think, maybe a smidge above it. And obviously that's what they were doing on election day, was they saw a chance to let's stick it to Trump, and that's what they did. So how do you see it? What message were voters sending in approving Prop 50? What does the big victory here mean?
I just think it comes down to hating Trump is a hell of a drug. It was self-serving for Newsom. He just wants to catapult himself onto the national stage. That seems to have worked a little bit. California voters, when you put the word Trump in there, will respond, and there's not a lot of thought put into it. It's just, oh, Trump bad, I vote for something. And yeah, I think you're right. If you were to ask them, do we support independent redistricting? They would say yes, but then you'd have to ask them, well, then why did you just vote against it? And I don't know if they'd have an answer to that.
Sort of like, the adage that we always grapple with, right? That people don't want to pay taxes for anything. But if you ask them all these budget things, do you want to keep funding this? Do you want to keep funding that? Do you want more funding for that? They're always going to say they want to spend more and tax less. And it's sort of, well, where does the rubber meet the road there? At a think tank, we think in terms of principles. And I think people don't sit there and vote on principles or something academic. They vote on what's their gut, what's the passion of the day. And, the whole Newsom effort, right? The last week of the campaign was all, every time I would turn on YouTube or turn on the TV, what did I see? Jasmine Crockett, Elizabeth Warren, right? All the most partisan people, Obama, in your face message to Democrats. This was not a good government campaign by any stretch of the imagination. It was a get Trump, get Trump, get Trump.
Yeah, and you brought up another good point, which is in reading about the behind the scenes stories about how not only the no campaign failed, but also the yes campaign passed. I can't help but think like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause California, like just how badly they threw away their own reputations. Voters vote with their hearts, and there's not always principle involved. And I don't say that badly. I think it's just true. I think it's kind of a human nature. But, advocacy groups are there to remind people to be principled. And when the advocacy groups don't have any principle, what's the point of even having those advocacy groups? I mean, I think they really shot themselves in the foot. Fortunately for them, they're just another left-wing constituency in a state that's run by Democrats. So maybe they'll survive in that sense. But man, what a just disappointing and corrupt performance by them.
Very disappointing, and you're right. There's always the struggle, right? We talk about it in politics. Are you voting head over heart, right? And I think most people vote heart over head. And especially something like this where you have a lot of emotion and you have a lot of, you can make a real emotional appeal. Boy, that's hard to come back at that with matters of principle and all of that. Let's talk about the campaign a little bit. Do you think that this effort won because, well, it was just a pretty simple, easy way to motivate Democrats to vote? Was the no campaign, was there any chance at all? Should we not be surprised, that at the end of the day, this is what the outcome would be? I will say one thing that was, not not particularly effective is that I and many others got these mailings from the California Republican Party like weeks after I had submitted my ballot and got my notification that my vote had been accepted and counted. That was a lot of people were saying that they got similar mailings in a similar scenario to me. And, I get that there's a point in the calendar where you can't update the role in your mailing universe, but boy, that just seems like thousands and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars wasted. And you wonder, boy, was the no campaign really firing on all cylinders?
You can last I checked and last I did it, which was not that long ago, you can update your daily roll of who's voted to the last day of the election. Now, granted, you have to still mail, so there's a little bit of lag time. But no, I'm with you. I mean, the first time I got any sort of mail from the No campaign was a month after I voted, and I mean that's just political malpractice. And for it to happen more than once is absurd. I think a lot of things went Newsom's way. I think that when he said that they saw in polling that when you throw Trump into the mix, this thing that is sort of a marginal idea really becomes, a winning idea. I think he was accurate when he said that, but also there was just a massive failure on the no side to communicate with voters, to turn out voters. There was a massive undercount with Republican voters who, are a natural opponent of this. I saw some exit polling that said 12% of Republicans voted for the yes side. I think some of that might be the very nature of ballot measures are a little bit confusing at times, but even still, that's a staggering number. And then, Kevin McCarthy and Jessica Patterson said that they would raise $100 million, and they raised something like $10 million. So massive failure there. Schwarzenegger did almost nothing, to get this thing over the finish line. He held one event one time, let people use the video for mailers, and then never seemed to do anything ever again after that. Charlie Munger put his money where his mouth was, but quickly saw that, no one else was matching him. So he hit his spending limit of $30 million and cut it off. The NRCC came in with $1 million late. It's honestly, it's a joke. A lot of people were really active on Twitter. What they don't get is that, and these are like Republican officials, what they don't get is that Twitter doesn't turn out voters. They weren't making calls. They weren't going door to door. And you take that in plus the complete erosion of the good government groups. I mean, it's just a massive failure. What can you say? It's just disappointing all across the board.
That's right. I think that's the way to frame it. What do you make of this thing? It was oft discussed both in California and across the country, and maybe explain some of this, because I would think if your television screens are bombarded with Gavin Newsom, Jasmine Crockett, Elizabeth Warren, Barack Obama tell you to do something, well, you would think every Republican in the state would want to do the opposite. But there's kind of a phenomenon that we've seen in the past, is that if Donald Trump is not on the ballot, there's a real lag in Republican interest in the election and turnout. Do you think that was at play here in California? It seemed like it was for sure in the East Coast races.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, that trend is always a little bit weird in California because I don't know that he's a net positive in California. Like, certainly if he engaged more in the state on this issue, it would have brought awareness to his supporters, but it would have also lent in credence to Newsom's claims that this was all about Trump. So I don't know that it's a net positive. Probably couldn't have hurt, especially looking at the results. It probably couldn't have hurt because it's hard to lose any worse than this lost. And but he's also has an erosion of support. His approval ratings are flagging. He hasn't done what he said he was going to do, at least not in terms of results. He's been tough on deportations, which we could debate whether or not he said he was going to go after just criminals or everyone, but he has held his word on at least ramping up deportations and securing the border. He has held his word on imposing tariffs, but a lot of the things he's done have been voters aren't seeing the benefits of tariffs, and that's because there are no benefits of it. It's been an abject failure in terms of policy. He said he was going to bring down inflation, which is something voters really care about. Inflation is as bad as it ever was. Not as bad as it ever was, but it is as bad as it was when he got elected. And a lot of that is self-owned, consequences. So I think it's all those things, and Republican voters went to sleep.
And certainly the White House didn't really engage in this measure at all in the campaign, and really not very much in all of the
Just to
campaigns.
say it's corrupt, and that's it.
Yeah. We'll get back to next round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. So let's move on now to what's the aftermath. And there are a few kind of aftermath issues to explore. So first, there's the legal aspect. And as I wrote about in my blog post this week on PRI's Right by the Bay, the first legal challenges have been filed to Prop 50. If you do it right, there are some legitimate legal challenges that you could file and that could drag out a while. And I guess that's kind of what we don't know, is that how serious will the courts take these challenges, and how long will it take? As we've seen in other states, when there have been seriously contested redistricting efforts, it can take many, many months of state and federal court hearings, and may even drag into past the filing deadline for 2026. And, states have gone either way, as whether, hey, maybe the lines that are the old lines typically remain in place while legal challenges are being considered by the court. So what do you think of this initial kind of legal effort that was filed yesterday as we tape this on Thursday afternoon? I thought maybe it's a sign of a bad omen. During their press conference announcing this, pretty much all of the microphones nearly fell off of the podium. So maybe that's a sign that the initial legal effort is not going to go very far. Certainly a lot of candidates and observers think that they're not holding their breath that the opponents are going to succeed with the initial lawsuit.
Yeah, it's hard to think that the lawsuit is going to go anywhere. Look, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to go out too far on a limb, but I believe certain lawyers, like Congressman Kevin Kiley, if he says he doesn't think it's going to pass, it's not going to be successful. If the federal government decided to sue, they could possibly drag it out.
And who, to remind our listeners,
Yeah,
is the lawyer
ironically,
who would be filing those lawsuits?
yeah, the Deputy Secretary for Civil Rights is the woman who the law firm who filed the claim or filed the suit is named after, Harmeet Dillon. So not only is she a better lawyer, but she's also got a pretty high caliber post there in the federal government. So I think she could possibly put something together if it's there, but I don't know. I don't know.
So the other shoe to drop, of course, has been the political dominoes. And we've seen the ink wasn't even dry on the election results. Of course, there's still many more percent of votes to count because, as you know, in California, it takes a long time to get all the ballots counted. But you've seen the candidates planting their flag. And so we saw here in the Sacramento area, Congressman Ami Bera, the Democratic incumbent, announced that he would shift over to challenge Congressman Kevin Kiley for re-election. That's a seat where, it is a lean Democrat seat, but there have been in the past midterm elections, Newsom won only narrowly in the district. So certainly an uphill battle, but Congressman Kiley definitely has a chance in that seat. Then we also saw the downside of this, and you saw Congressman Ken Calvert, who's been in Congress since 1992, and you might think, well, enough is enough. And his district was eliminated for all intents and purposes in this Gavin Newsom's gerrymander. He announced he was going to challenge Congresswoman Young Kim, and she's made clear she's not backing down from a fight. She's already out there hustling. going, and she already has $5 million in the bank for a campaign. So that could be a mega battle royale down there. And there's rumors Congressman Darrell Issa has a much tougher toss-up seat. He may decide to move over there and get in that race as well. So what do you make of these big messes that we've created for ourselves with the post Prop 50 world, Matt? I mean, I think it's probably a sign of more races like these to come.
Yeah, it's probably a sign of more races like these to come. It's always funny when, so many members of Congress or so many politicians who talk about not being politicians, are scared of, going back to having a day job and not being members of Congress. But Young Kim's a great member of Congress, and it would be a real shame to see money wasted trying to unseat her with people who don't want to run in their current districts.
We also saw that former Stockton Mayor Kevin Lincoln announce that he's shifting his congressional campaign and he's going to run against first-term Congressman Adam Gray, who still has a tough seat to battle for, but it was made easier with the newly drawn lines. So, stay
Who,
tuned.
who did Adam Gray beat to get the seat in the first place? Was it Kevin Lincoln?
He beat John Duarte,
John Duarte, and
and it
then
was the
Lincoln ran
closest
against Harder.
yeah, it was the closest congressional race in the nation, I believe. It was something like 300 votes. And
Yeah.
Kevin Lincoln ran last time against Josh Harder, who also
Yeah.
saw his seat made a little more advantageous to him, but, he still will have a race on his hands. The big impetus for all of this, and you can't help but say is probably the big winner of election night, is Gavin Newsom. There's been a lot of discussion of, he was only doing this to bolster his national advantage, and he saw, people didn't want the let's work together Gavin Newsom that they saw earlier this year. Democratic voters wanted a fighter, hence our Prop 50 debate here. Where does Gavin Newsom go from here? You can't help but think that his national standing is greatly enhanced by the victory on Prop 50, but certainly the questions about his authenticity and sincerity and believability and all the other weaknesses, are still there for Gavin Newsom on a national scale.
He always does well in a controlled environment, and the second he opens himself up to inconvenient questions, he falls apart. I imagine that would be the same. Also, he could potentially be peaking early. Of course, he could also be potentially clearing the field. It's hard to say. Other people have to probably step up and challenge him, but he certainly is the hot hand at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, certainly all you saw two names dominated the headlines through this fall campaign, Zoran Mondami and Gavin Newsom. And, when they're talking about you, that's usually not a bad thing, even if it's good or bad news. The question is, can he parlay this into, an effective national campaign? And we'll see. This is a one moment in time. All these elections are one moment in time. Does it portend a trend? Sure. But, every election is a snapshot of a moment. And, a year from now could be a totally different political environment.
This is
Speaking of,
also his biggest accomplishment. And like honestly, if your biggest accomplishment is gerrymandering, I think he's going to have a tough time selling it nationally. He does talk very aspirationally, which if you've never heard him before, it might sound appealing, but he's running against the fact that his record in California is abysmal, even though he would say that's just the haters saying that. I think when he comes up with his accomplishments, they're always something abstract, like, California is the fifth largest economy. It was the fourth, but now it's the fifth under his watch. It'll be something like nebulous like that, or it'll be something totally made up, like we actually don't have that high of taxes here, which is objectively false. Or he'll bring up something like how many Nobel laureates there are in California, or, whatever, like stuff that has nothing to do with him, or doesn't resonate with voters, or it's just a complete fabrication. That's pretty much what he brings. This is the first tangible thing he's done. But this might endear him to Democratic voters. Maybe, this might be the thing that they like. So who knows?
And, you can't, of course, talk about the moment in time without talking about the news we learned this morning that Speaker Nancy Pelosi, been in Congress since 1987. I think she was the longest serving House Democratic leader, announced today that she's not going to run for re-election next year. And it certainly brings to a close a big era. And, it's interesting when I think about Pelosi, when I Certainly when you see people talk about her and her legacy, the journalists and others are quick to say, well, she's such a brilliant tactician, and she's so accomplished, and she's such a smart and savvy party leader. I'm sorry, maybe it's the inner partisan in me, but I just don't see that when I think about Nancy Pelosi. I mean, I just see the goofy comments on TV, the tone deaf, the getting your hair done during COVID when everybody else's small business was shut down, the $5,000 refrigerator with the fancy ice cream in it during COVID, all of those things that really a kind of just out of touch politician who really has a policy legacy of more government control of your life, higher spending, higher debt, higher taxes for the American people. To me, it's sure I can see and appreciate the accomplishment she got. Anybody who gets to be Speaker of the House, you got to tip your hat to them for that. But boy, her legacy is not one that I am going to be looking back on fondly. Matt, how do you rate the legacy and career of Speaker Pelosi?
Well, like Charlie Munger and Kathy Wood, she's one of the great stock pickers of her time. I think her stock portfolio has outperformed the market by something like 130%. Besides that, she's obviously in terms of like as a Democratic leader, she's managed to stay leader for a really, really long time, which is no small feat. That's a tough thing. She fought back a lot of challenges, especially at a time where people were not only concerned about her stock trading, but also concerned about her age. And, a new wave of Democrats were looking for youth and enthusiasm. She managed to beat them all back. So in that sense, she was I think, a fantastic tactician. She got through the Affordable Care Act, which, if that was all she ever did, I mean, that's a pretty astounding feat. She was kind of one of the first to sort of pervert the use of budget reconciliation to get things through. I'm saying that objectively. I mean, obviously, I hate most of her policies. Obamacare has been an abject failure. But I'm not with you in the sense that I don't think she's a brilliant tactician. She did have some silly comments, like we need to pass it so we can find out what's in it. But someone who speaks that much publicly is going to have some gaffes. I think on the whole, she is the kind of person that will that like history books will be written about. But again, I'm with you and many others who think that her successes have really had a bad effect on society. But would she be considered like an LBJ type person? I mean, I don't know, maybe. So like if I'm being objective, I thought she was a pretty good leader. If I'm weighing her accomplishments on their merit, I'd say she passed a lot of really, really bad legislation.
Well, I don't think they'll be writing five-volume biographies of Nancy Pelosi anytime soon. We'll get back to our great guest in just a moment. But first, are you following PRI on Facebook? By following PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, that's all one word, you'll be the first to read free market ideas from PRI's terrific team of scholars on all the hot issues like education freedom, single-payer healthcare, crime, homelessness, green mandates like the ban on natural gas appliances, and more. Plus, when you follow PRI at facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute, you'll be the first to know when tickets go on sale for PRI's must-attend luncheons, dinners, and galas across the state. And you'll be first in line to secure your spot to hear great speakers like Michael Schellenberger, Gordon Chang, Steve Hilton, and many more. So go to facebook.com/Pacific Research Institute and follow PRI today so you'll be the first to know. As we close, let's touch on two other things in our talk of all things politics. First, the national election results. Democrat did pretty well across the board nationwide on Tuesday. They won the governorship of New Jersey. They swept all the major offices in Virginia, including electing an attorney general who apparently likes to, call out hits on his political opponents. And then all the oxygen really was surrounding Zoran Mandami's election as the first, really communist mayor of New York City. What do those election results say about where we're at? I think it's a moment of time. It's hard to take this moment and extrapolate it for the future, but there's no question that Democrats are on an uptick here, and it's probably related to the Trump administration has not delivered in lowering the cost of living for Americans. And, if anything, with their tariff policies, they're making them worse. And Mandami, I don't know if that's an embrace of his communism as much as, he unquestionably is an interesting, very charismatic politician. And, when you are interesting and people want to follow you more, generally those people do pretty well in politics.
Yeah, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and before getting onto Mom Domini, I just want to say this. Like, it's hard to overstate how important the federal government is to the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, much of which is included in Northern Virginia. And, to have this election in the middle of a shutdown, Winsome Sears, the Republican candidate, never had a chance. She was also not a particularly strong candidate. I saw analysis that said something like 75% of the ads she ran involved transgenderism. And there was a time where, maybe the last election where that might have played better, but, people are concerned about kitchen table issues, and that's just not one of them. And Abigail Spanberger campaigned on those. It is always disappointing to see Virginia, the Virginia Senate, I think actually was like a electoral landslide for Democrats there too. It's just a shame to see Virginia go so woke, but a lot of that is the weakness of the poor strategy of the Republicans in the state, and certainly the ones in the government. To the extent that Republicans are even keeping the government shutdown going, it really had a negative effect on Virginia. As far as Mamdani's concerned, I don't think he's the first communist. I think he's pretty much Bill de Blasio. I mean, I think they were very similar in a lot of ways. Mamdani is younger and a little bit more outspoken, but they have very similar positions. It's going to be fun to watch him not really get his policies through, and then to blame a bunch of left-wing socialist city council members in the legislature for not getting his policies through when he's not a particularly strong incumbent. Did I see that he never introduced legislation in the assembly in New York, something like that? Like he had a very weak legislative record. He has almost no work history. He's going to be terrible, and he's introducing a bunch of policies that have been tried and fail elsewhere. I do think it's going to be fun to watch. I'm glad I don't live in New York, and I think part of it is because people are excited about his socialist policies. I think also, Cuomo was a selfish jerk who he's unlikable, and he just resigned in disgrace not too long ago, and now he wants to run again. Get a real job, loser. Like, just knock it off.
We talk about not being able to read the room. And also, if you were going to set up the perfect storm, this is it.
Yeah.
It was a replay of 2016, but I remember when it was all the other candidates need to drop out so we can have one-on-one versus Trump in the primary. They all ate one another up. That's kind of what happened here with Sliwa and Cuomo. But there isn't anyone in the entire metropolis of New York that you could have run as a Democrat that was a better, more electable candidate. There wasn't an alderman, a city councilman, anybody, a media voice, a business owner, anyone other than Andrew Cuomo. I mean, that's just ridiculous, and just his hubris knows no bounds.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's if I was a California if this was in California or I was a New Yorker, I'd be more annoyed by it. Now I just think it's kind of funny to watch. He had a terrible track record as governor. It ended in disgrace, and the idea that he thinks it must have been funny for Mamdani to get those calls from people telling him he should drop out of the race so Cuomo could be the guy. I mean, if I was Mamdani, I would have just laughed in their face and, said, why doesn't this loser drop out? Or when they were trying to tell the Republican to drop out. I mean, if I was the Republican, I would have said, why doesn't this loser drop out? Why don't you vote for me? I mean, why would I drop out for this guy? He resigned in disgrace. He's not governor at the moment because he'd resigned in disgrace. That in itself should have, completely disqualified him in any meaningful way. The fact that he got 30% still is absurd.
Let alone all the old people who died because of their bad policies during COVID.
He's terrible governor. Yeah.
Terrible policies, terrible, and kind of got his comeuppance. So finally, as we close, we couldn't end this week without a big bit of political news that you may have overlooked in all the coverage of this week's election, and that is the presumed frontrunner for governor, kind of a governor in waiting, U.S. Senator Alex Padilla, announcing that shockingly he will not enter the race for governor next year. It was kind of assumed that after the mess with Katie Porter and her disastrous interview heard around the world, that the Democratic insiders were gearing up to have a major candidate like Padilla come in and just totally take over and dominate the race. Well, obviously that's not going to happen. So why do you think Padilla didn't want to run? I mean, I can't believe it's that the state is ungovernable. I think he would have done about as well as anybody else could being the governor, despite his recent, tussles with Kristi Noem and her associates. He was known in Sacramento as a pretty kind of bland, workhorse politician. He wasn't really going out there, waving the flag, screaming on the steps. I think he would have been, a pretty reserved governor. What do you think it went into his thinking in deciding not to run for governor after all? And where are we at with the governor's race now with him not running? Is another big shoe about to drop? Is another big candidate like maybe Rick Caruso or Tom Steyer or someone like that going to jump in now that we have this void?
I would not be surprised if there was some kind of arrangement between Newsom, Padilla, and Harris that Harris would stay out of the race and probably run for governor if Padilla stayed out. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see Alex Padilla in Newsom's administration if, God forbid, he becomes the president. That's a little bit of me just I have no sources on that one, but that would be the thing that makes the most sense. I can't think there's anybody else who California Democrats really wanted Alex Padilla to run. So I can't imagine that there's someone who has a better stature within the party besides Harris. Tom Steyer, I thought it was really funny that Newsom, I think it was Newsom, they ran a poll or did focus tests on which Prop 50 ads were most effective. And they went out of their way to point out that the ones involving Tom Steyer were the only ones that actually had a negative effect. People were more likely to vote against Prop 50 after seeing his ads than they were to vote for it. And I think it's really funny that they were putting that out there. I don't think anybody wants Tom Steyer to run. And I don't know if there's another person out there who could pick it up. I don't know, unless Nancy Pelosi wants to run, and I'm saying that with a little bit of hyperbole because I don't believe she does. But yeah, man, I don't know. I think you'll probably end up seeing Harris get back in, or it'll be the same duds we have now.
And interestingly, I would agree with you. I think the only people who want Tom Steyer to run for governor are the television station owners of California who would make lots of money with the millions of dollars he would waste on television ads.
Yeah, his coalition, his coalition is Tom Steyer and his consultants, and the network, the TV execs.
That's right. Well, on that note, we of course have plenty to chew on with the governor's race and the weeks and months ahead on Next Round podcast. So, Matt, thanks as always for another great all-star roundup of another election in the book. And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in today, and be sure to join us next week for another interesting episode of Next Round. Have a great week.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.